the resource planning discipline, this is an idea whose time has come. It is something that is being written about. Gartner, for instance, Mike Hanford, a research director at Gartner, I refer you to his articles recently about the importance of resource planning as a discipline. And others of the similar ilk are doing the same thing. There are conferences about resource planning. Many of you have attended portfolio resource planning conferences. So we are at the inflection point, I believe, of the development of a discipline around resource planning. Now, where this came about for me and why I'm so passionate about this is that in 20 years at Xerox, I never had any training whatsoever in project management. I sort of stumbled on it after about 15 years, having been planning and managing all along. And I was impressed and excited by the capability of the project management methods and tools to convey information, to convey understanding, and to bring people together and focus them on getting something done. And wonderful things have been done with project management. But after starting a project management consulting and training company, it turned out that not everything can be done with that method. There are things missing. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. So what is the problem? What are we trying to solve with the resource planning? So I'm giving you quotes from people like you, and I swear to you these are direct quotes. I don't have a clue what the people in my organization are working on. Or, related, we have all these people. Why can't we get it done? Why can't we do that project? We start all kinds of projects, but we have trouble finishing them. After all, it only takes one person to start a project. If it has 50 or 500 people down at the tail end, you're going to get a stack up of some kind. We can start them, we can't finish them. I can't tell if they're working on high priority projects, and really what's behind that is we keep killing projects and they keep coming back. So at the end of the year, we thought we weren't going to work on that thing and we've spent half the funding on it. And finally, in boom times and busts, we can't tell what skills we need to add or remove from the organization to preserve the portfolio. Well, these are all resource planning issues. Now, this is management team speak here, but there are other people who have problems. And so I suggest to you that the project managers and resource managers are really important, and they have problems. So the project manager gets approval to proceed through a phase gate, and he doesn't get the resources that were promised or committed at the phase gate. How are you going to finish that project? You're not going to finish it on time. That's an exception case. Resource managers, they're always complaining. Hey, we've got too much work to do. Management never understands what we're doing, and they always ask us to do more. And perhaps worst is this last one. At the phase gate, the project gets approval to proceed. The resource manager finds out about it after the phase gate and says, hey, I never agreed to that. That's not my plan. So we have a disconnect in the organization between the people actually doing and leading the work at the functional level and the project teams. So this is a pretty bad situation. So after 50 plus years of modern project management process and tool development, and after 25 plus years of portfolio management process and tool development, we still have this problem. So that's not a very good sign. Something's wrong, something's missing. Resource planning is pretty old. I don't know if any of you in the back can recognize these hieroglyphs, but this is a resource OBS for the builders of the Egyptian pyramids. So what this is saying, they have 2,000 person crew. They had 10 or 15 of those. Take them 20 or 25 years to build the thing. This is the big giant pyramid. And they had a structure, the gang of drunkards and the friends of Menkori or whatever this is. And then down here in the resource OBS to these little dots, which are 20 men. There's a first level resource manager or team leader down here. And there's a resource structure. This stuff, resource planning, goes back at least that far. So let me define resource manager so that we're all on the same page. A resource manager has direct reports. So in that resource OBS, every one of those nodes or dots on that tree was a resource manager. Line managers, functional managers, team leaders are resource managers in my definition. A first level resource manager has individual contributors, no resource managers reporting to him or her. And resource managers do resource planning. That's their job, or part of it. But other people, other roles also do resource planning. So it's not a direct one-to-one correspondence between a line manager and resource planning. So given these definitions, I suggest that there's a solution. We need a clear data provider role for the resource managers. And what's important is that that be maintained with some degree of purity. That is to say, you don't want to have a data provider providing data and then have it massaged at every level of the management chain, producing spin along the way and misinformation so that the data that was started pure ends up tarnished. A clear data provider role, and then use this at phase gates, portfolio reviews, and operations reviews by the management team. So that's the high-level view of what I believe is necessary in terms of a resource planning solution. Now, the differences, there are differences, serious differences, between the roles of project managers and resource managers. The first is focused. So the PMs have a very single-minded job. Their job is to deliver this project. And so they need to have skills in project scheduling, project management methods, leadership, and so on. Resource managers, on the other hand, have a broad responsibility. They have to hire, fire, do performance appraisals, look to non-project work as well as project work, career development, and so on. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard, hey, I have a day job. Don't ask me to do all that stuff. Microsoft Project's too complicated. This is supposed to be the simple tool. The other thing is level of detail. Project managers typically plan at the task level, but resource managers typically look at the project resource level or the skill resource level against a project. They're usually not down at the task level. They don't have time to do that. So that's a differentiation in roles. Now, project management, don't get me wrong here, I am as positive about project management as a methodology as I was when I first encountered it. All of the good things about it are very good and remain good. So it's served us well, but I suggest it's led us astray. We've been trying to do this resource planning for the whole organization using project management approaches. And that doesn't work. It's too detailed. It becomes inaccurate and out of date very quickly. And it doesn't include the non-project work. And worst of all, to my mind, is that it doesn't include the resource manager connected with the projects in the portfolio. Now, why did that happen? Well, I'm suggesting this is part of the reason why it happened. PMI membership. Look at this growth. Very little for a very long time. Actually, this doesn't go back to the beginning. And then all of a sudden, there's an inflection point here and another one here. I showed this curve at Dick's DPE conference in 2004, and I predicted that in 2010, there'd be almost 500,000 members of PMI. And as you can see, PMI now has 550,000 approximately members. And this is just PMI members. You know, in terms of number of project managers around the world, it's probably double this. And what this means is that companies are spending enormous amounts of money on project management training, consulting, tools, and so on. And spending of that magnitude gets mind share. And the Project Management Institute and the various organizations are doing the appropriate thing with respect to project management, but it's getting mind share over the resource planning methodology. So that's part of the problem. Now, it gets worse, because notice this is a log scale, and this curve from the middle 1990s is very consistent. And this rate of growth is huge. And if it continues at this rate, by 2011 or 12, there'll be 1 million project managers in PMI. And in 2020, there'll be 10 million. And the project management body of knowledge, their standard document, and the project management standard for program management and portfolio management, these are released standards, do not address resource planning. I mean, literally at all, other than in passing and very imperfectly. So this is a huge gap in our methods standards. It needs to be filled. "40 years ago, I did this resource plan. Here are my people in my group. It was Pete Rumsey and, so on. Here are the projects they were working on. Here were the periods. And here's how much they were going to have to work on that project to get it done." And I've done resource plans like this as recently as 2 weeks ago. And, and millions of Excel spreadsheets around the world are doing resource plans just like this. Now, why, after all these years of the development of tools and methodologies, and we're collecting all the project plans, do we have resource managers still doing this? Well, the answer I suggest is what I said before. The collection of very detailed resource-loaded project plans doesn't do the job for us. And it leaves out the most essential people in the execution of the portfolio. It's the resource managers and the people who work for them. This is, as I said, 40 years ago, I was at Xerox. We did terrible things with this kind of resource planning. It was really awful. We took the total for each project, we summed it up, then we put them in priority order, all the projects. We had a cumulative running total of how much it would take to do all those projects, and we just drew a cut line. And we got in terrible trouble all the time. First of all, the data wasn't very good. We only did it once a year. Cut lines are terrible. They don't work because they don't take into account the timing of demand for skills as well as people. If you have 50 people, they aren't all doing the same kind of thing. You may only have 5 people who can do the essential thing. So we were just really pathetic. And many companies are still just the same. So where does this all fit together? Well, I suggest this is the model. This is the model of, it's a process model. These boxes aren't project managers here and resource managers here, although there's an implication. Resource planning as a process involves primarily and substantially the direct resource manager, the functional manager. But it also may involve a role that I call resource planner, who may be in a staff position, may be working at a PMO or a portfolio support office. A resource planner is focused on the resource planning that's going on for that portfolio. So resource planning, project managers are substantially involved here. And then, of course, the project approval committees or portfolio teams executing to the strategy that has been defined by the senior management or the business. Now, one of the things that I've drawn here is a very heavy line here to indicate the importance of having the resource managers and project managers in alignment. And that, I think, is a huge benefit of this resource planning methodology. Now, when does this occur in terms of as you execute over a year or over multiple years? Well, I suggest it's a repetitive process. Surveying the demand for resources and the available supply and the status of your various projects that you've got going on at operating plan time, and considering all of the possible combinations of new projects you want to undertake. So there's a survey, analyze, and optimize process that's going to go on, and that for some of us, at Xerox, it took us 9 months to do an operating plan. So we'd start in June, and we'd finish 3 or 4 months after the operating year began. It's a little bit ineffective. It's a little bit like New York budgets. If anybody knows New York State, they often don't have a budget until the end of the year. So there's a very big process that goes on. Everybody gets involved. There's a lot of planning. The next place that that same process goes on, survey, analyze, optimize, is individually at every phase gate review. And it's smaller. It focuses on the project and the resource organizations that are involved on that project. So it's not as big a deal, but it's critically important to do it so that when you come here or here, you're looking ahead to say, was the estimate of requirement the same then as it is now? And if it is not, it needs to be adjusted so we can make a proper decision. The next place this occurs is periodic audits. So someone, presumably the project approval teams or portfolio teams or some form of the management team, needs to look on a periodic basis across the portfolio. And the same kind of thing has to be happening here. You need fresh forecasts for your resource demand. You need fresh status about your projects. Well, I suggest the natural way for that to happen is for the project managers to provide the project status and the resource managers to provide the resource forecast and actuals, if you choose to track that way. So that at each of these audits, you may not have any phase gates, but if you do, you have a phase gate review that takes into account the entire portfolio. So the whole idea here is to integrate project planning and resource planning with your development lifecycle methodology and your portfolio management methodology. So if you are doing that all along, then periodically the senior management team can do a portfolio review, quarterly or semi-annually, whatever. And if some big bombshell happens, like a regulatory change occurs, or there's some huge a merger, for instance, or a huge change in the plan where you have some new opportunity or some new crisis, if you have been collecting the data all along on a periodic basis, that's not a big job. But if you've been ignoring it all along, when you have this exception, you're going to have a huge problem. People are going to have to stop everything they're doing and go through the same kind of planning that you did for your operating plan. Don't do that. That's painful and unnecessary if you do a few simple things along the way. So here's the prescription, and it's fairly straightforward. Capture, fresh, that means periodic, credible, that means from the first level resource manager or close thereto, demand data from resource managers closest to the source. And keep it good. Don't let it be spun on the way up the chain. Second, use that data to demonstrate that you can accomplish this high-value portfolio you've chosen. And if you can't do that, you're not going to finish everything you start. You need to make some decisions. So demonstrate that you can do it and require concurrence among the PMs and the RMs, the project managers and resource managers, and the portfolio managers, so that everybody has fingerprinted the plan and that you have accountability and responsibility merged appropriately at the phase gates. And then keep it simple where possible and appropriate. Now, this is a very high-level sort of overview of what I believe is a fundamental issue in managing portfolios and managing organizations. And it's that there is a lack of a clear involvement of the resource managers in a way that brings them into alignment with the project managers and the portfolio team. And there is a clear lack of fresh, credible data which would answer all of those questions that we looked at the beginning that have been going on and are still going on in organizations around the world. And that process I call a resource planning process. We can call it anything we want, but it better get going, because the more we're going up the chain in project management, methodology, and investment, we better be balancing that somewhat with a resource planning process and outlook. So that's the resource planning focus that I see as critically important. That's the reason for this conference. You're going to hear from some wonderful speakers both about this and about related topics, about the life cycle and portfolio management, things that interact with this process to make the whole thing work. And so I urge you to do as Dick did, to gather ideas from each other and make the most of the conference. So thank you very much. Go forth and have a great time.